Today we are living in a golden age of museums. It seems like today there is a museum for every subject under the sun. If you go to Asheville, North Carolina, you can find the Pinball Museum. There is a museum of broken relationships in Zagreb, Croatia. And now, as of a few months ago in Sweden, you can visit the one and only museum known as the Museum of Failure. The museum features an array of products that just never took off. In 1993, a relatively new company called Apple created what was called the Newton Message Pad. It took notes and sent faxes, but had terrible handwriting capabilities. It was ahead of its time, pre-quality touchscreen technology, and it never made it. It's in the museum. Who here doesn't remember Google Glasses? They were all the rave when they came out at the time. They were priced at $600 a pop, which was not quite something to rave about, and so no one bought them. They too are in the museum. Colgate, the same company that makes your toothpaste, made a beef lasagna dinner. Also on display in the museum. I can't imagine why that one didn't work out. Why is it that all of these items are on display? Why is it that there is a museum dedicated to the art of failure at all? According to Dr. Samuel West, the museum's curator, the Museum of Failure is not supposed to be a dirgeful, mournful look at what it means to fail. Rather, he remarks, the museum's true goal is supposed to be about celebrating innovation. Quote, the innovations housed in the Museum of Failure showcase products that took a large leap because they tried something new. But ultimately, for one reason or another, they did not stick with consumers. However, instead of masking failure, which is what happens countless times before a truly successful product is introduced, the museum shines light on imperfection in the hope of creating an environment where people are moved to innovate. In other words, not be afraid to fail. You know, I can't help but believe that as we enter Yom Kippur, as we almost complete our Kol Nidre service, I cannot believe what an important lesson this is for us to keep in mind tonight. Vince Lombardi, arguably one of the greatest football coaches of all time, didn't get a coaching job he applied for because they said he, quotes, possessed minimal football knowledge and lacked motivation. Michael Jordan, we've heard this many times, the greatest basketballer of all time, was cut from his high school team. Charles Schultz, the creator of Peanuts and Charlie Brown, had every cartoon he submitted rejected by his high school yearbook staff. A few years ago, David Brooks of the New York Times wrote a very powerful book. It was called The Road to Character. And Brooks points out that today, among the various challenges we as a society face, is the way that human beings try to do everything they can to mask failure, instead of owning it and growing from the experience. Brooks argues that the way that we build better selves, the way we learn to tough it out in an increasingly challenging world, is by convincing ourselves to take risks. And again, the reason that we have stagnated so badly lately is that we've created a society that doesn't encourage failure. We are scared what will happen if we fail. Failure is painful, it can hurt. We don't wish it on anyone, especially our children and grandchildren. But when we stifle failure, rather than celebrate it. We also stifle character development and progress. That's why a few years ago, Dr. Johannes Haushofer, a professor of psychology and public affairs at Princeton University, published a resume, and he shared it with his students. It wasn't exactly your typical resume. Instead of highlighting his various publications, honors, and awards, it listed every fellowship that he didn't get, every school and position from which he was rejected, and every paper he submitted that never got published. Now, I'm sure if all of us here today sat down and thought about it, we could do a similar exercise with our own life. Mine would include things like the following: getting a 38 on a Hebrew spelling test in 3rd grade, not getting hired for a Torah reading job in high school. I know, hard to believe, right? And you know who beat me out? The current general manager of the Boston Red Sox. Something tells me I wouldn't have beat him out for his current job. Getting rejected from the University of Pennsylvania and not even being given an interview for the one-time prestigious Wexner Fellowship. Needless to say, the response that the professor received to his resume was somewhat shocking, but maybe not all that shocking. His students loved it so much, they sent it to their friends, and it went all over the internet. This led him to refer to his resume, quote, as his crowning meta failure, because his resume received more attention than his entire body of academic work. Why do we have a museum of failure? Why do we need one at all? It's because in a meaningful way, we need to begin to acknowledge again that failure is a healthy part of life, even an essential step to achieving greatness. What separates the greats from the not-so-greats, especially in light of Kol Nidre, what we are doing right now, is a willingness to be accountable for our errors and to see our mistakes as learning and character-building moments. Teddy Roosevelt, he was no Nachschlepp, once said, "It is far better to dare mighty things, to win glorious triumphs, even though checkered by failure, than to take rank with poor spirits who neither enjoy much nor suffer much, because they live in the gray twilight that knows neither victory nor defeat." Kol Nidre is the moment in the Yom Kippur service where we take an honest accounting of our failure as Jews. Rambam Maimonides writes in his Hilchot Teshuvah that Kol Nidre is the moment when, quote, we repent of the past and proclaim before the knower of all purposes that we won't return to this behavior again. Yet as the anomaly of the museum points out, this proclamation before God and the community that we've made mistakes is so countercultural to the world then and certainly countercultural to the world now. How many of us have become used and accustomed to what we call corporate jargon? Or maybe that same jargon out of the mouths of friends about why something did not succeed. Yet if we're going to make a positive change, the kind that Yom Kippur wants us to do, Kol Nidre reminds us that failure and owning up to our failures are an important part of life. Tonight, we stood before God, a Beit Din, a court, the Torah, and the Jewish people in a holy moment. And in that holy moment, we formulaically acknowledged our failures of the past and our failures that will be yet to come. Why did we fail? Perhaps we failed because what we tried was off-brand for us and not in sync with our character. Tell that to the Colgate toothpaste company. Perhaps we failed because we attempted to take leaps that we ourselves were not ready for, or maybe the world wasn't ready for. But maybe with a little bit more time and preparation, we may be ready in the future. No doubt the Newton ThinkPad didn't take off in 1993, But by 5783, there is not a home in the world without an iPad or a touchscreen device. And so tonight, this is what we say. We say, Kol Nidre ve'esarei ve'charamei. Let each of us tonight pledge in our hearts not only to build a museum, but a temple to failure, to our failures, so that we may not be afraid to innovate, so that we may not be afraid to grow in character, achieve greatness, and maybe even heal in the new year. Gmar Chatima Tova.